John 21, verse 18 and verse 19. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, so again, Peter must have been middle-aged, right? He wasn't young and he wasn't old. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go. That is, where you do not wish to go naturally. Before Peter was a Christian, when he was young, he went wherever he wanted. His own will, his own way, his own wish. Now as a Christian, he's going to be led. The Lord is prophesying he'll be led to where he doesn't naturally want to go. What's he talking about? Verse 19 gives us the answer. Now this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. So the Lord was talking about, telling Peter, you're going to die a violent death. It's going to be a violent departure for you. And that would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. When he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. This thought that I would like to bring out here is dying to the glory of God. Dying to the glory of God. 5 points. Number one, the certainty of death. Peter, you're going to die. The Lord was telling him ahead of time, you're going to die. He knew that, but the Lord was telling him that. And so it is for us, each one of us here, unless the Lord comes first when we're still alive and are raptured out, we will die. We always think it's going to be somebody else that's going to die, but no, I will die. I will die. And we ought to be ever mindful of that. Mindful of death, mindful that our flesh is weak and that our days are few and that death is certain and judgment is righteous and eternity is long, and then this world is nothing but a dressing room in preparation for eternity. Prepare, prepare, prepare. And there is no preparation apart from being in union with Christ, but through Him we can prepare and we can die in a glorious way. So death is certain. Sin entered the human race, right? Romans 5:12, sin entered. An invasion, and sin entered the human race, and with it death also. And it says death spread to every man. Just like a disease, death spread to every man. It says in another place, speaks of the reign of sin and death. Is that your worldview? That this world is an evil world ruled by sin and ruled by death, as though they were two co-tyrants out there managing, ruling, reigning over this present world. So death is certain and death is spread. And I've said this before, I just think of it repeatedly. The farm where I grew up in northeast Iowa, I could go from that farm right on up that gravel road both ways, and I could name off, maybe 25 or 30 farmers that were friends of mine, friends of my father's, and now they are gone. Axel Rasmussen, gone. Harry Davis, gone. Floyd Thompson, gone. Ed Cordes, gone. Zeke Welch, gone. Baldy Pieper, gone. Merv Waring, gone. And on down the road I could go. They were there, but they're gone. They're gone. I knew them. I can see them in my mind. I can hear their laugh. These dear men, and their wives, but they are gone. Many cases, even their place is gone. And so death is certain. I heard on the news the other day about this fellow. He was 110 years old. They used to call him one of the strongest men in the world, and he was still at age 110. He was still strong, and he used to bend dimes. Now he could only bend quarters at 110. But he was crossing the road and a car hit him and he is gone. I was reading about this fellow named Angus McCaskill. Spelled a little different than the politician. But he grew up in north of Scotland in the Hebrides. He died around 1900. His mother was a Campbell. Probably Duncan Campbell knew him. But they said he was one of the strongest men in the world. He grew to be about 8 foot tall. And his shoulders were almost 4 feet wide. and his chest was 80 inches in circumference. My hand, the breadth of I had to measure, my hand was a little over 4 inches wide. His hand was 8 inches wide. And they said he could throw a horse over a fence. They said he could pick up an anchor, like almost 1.5 tons, chest high. He could take 2 fingers and hold a 100-pound weight out like that for 10 minutes. And on the stories go, but he's dead, he's gone. It's really, death is certain. Peter, you're going to die. My second point here is that the timing of our death is foreordained of God. I mean, the Lord said, Peter, you're not going to die young. You're not going to die now. You're going to make it to old age, and you're going to die then. And so we're reminded, aren't we, brethren, that our times are in the hands of the Lord. Our times are in His hands. Psalm 31. What a consolation. That there's no accidents, no perchance, but our times are in His hands. No, we don't want to presume and tempt the Lord, but our times are in His hands. And you know, Peter said up here in verse 17, Lord, you know all things. And indeed, this is coming out. Yes, the Lord knows even the time of our death. And Peter was imprisoned, you know. Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 12, he was in prison, but he could have been slain with the edge of the sword like James was in prison too, but he didn't. He got out of there and went on to live longer and longer and until old age. And so sometimes the Lord tells us when we're going to die. You know, Peter knew. He said, the Lord has made it clear to me that the laying aside of this tabernacle is imminent. Also, Paul the apostle knew. He said, the time of my departure is at hand. Sometimes the Lord tells people that. He tells us ahead of time that you're soon going to die. And sometimes it comes out in prophecy, you know. God reveals it to another. For example, John Brown, who is one of the outstanding covenanters. He was just a farmer, but he was a godly man. Old Alexander Peden, the prophet of the covenanters, and he said he'd never seen anybody godly like John Brown. And old Peden, he married John and Isabel, and at their wedding he said, Isabel, you've got a good man here, but you better cherish him because you won't have him long. It will be a bloody thing. You better keep your sheets handy. And the prophecy came true. He was martyred for the cause, for the crown rights of King Jesus. And so again, the timing is foreordained by God. And listen, like the old Puritans said, we are invincible until our work is done. The Christian is invincible until his work is done. My third point here, and that is the kind of death is also foreordained of God. You know, the Lord prophesied what kind of a death, at least in part, what kind of a death that Peter would die. That was ordained of God too. I mean, maybe not the details, but most people take it that he was crucified, and history says he was crucified even upside down at his request. And so, you know, this he spoke, verse 19, signifying by what kind of death he would die. Would it be natural? Would it be violent? Would it be easy? Would it be suffering? Would it be sudden? Would it be slow? And for Peter, it was a violent death. Now here's John, you know, his good friend John the Apostle. There we find him in the end, sitting out there in the Isle of Patmos, apparently a slow death, a natural death for him. We don't know for sure, I guess, but for Peter, it was not that way. He could have drowned when he was trying to walk on water. He could have been cut down by the edge of the sword, but they say he was crucified. He didn't die in jail or rot there, but rather he was crucified. And so let's think, you know, don't you sometimes think about it? How am I going to breathe my last? Where's the end going to be? How will it be? You know, think of the end, how it was for Samson. You know, I mean, he could have died in those battles. One time he fought them all off, 1,000 of them, with the jawbone of a donkey. They didn't get him. And so he had various conflicts, but here he ends up, pushing the pillars down, and in his final act, that was what killed him. And how about Elijah's end? He really didn't have an end, did he? How about Zechariah, whom they slew between the porch and the altar? How about Jonathan and David? You'd think David would have been, all the battles that he had, you would have thought that he would have been the one that was killed and battled violently, but no, he dies an easy death, and his good friend Jonathan is the one that's killed in the battlefield. Here's John Bunyan, he sat in those old damp prisons for like 12 years and didn't die, but he ends up dying, catching a cold, and that was the thing that brought him down. How about John Peyton, the missionary to the South Seas? You would think, here he made it. He escaped all these cannibals and ends up dying in old age, an easy death. There was another man named Alan Gardner. He was a missionary. He went over to China, and then he went to South Africa, and then he finally goes to South America, crosses the Andes Mountains, ends up in Papua New Guinea, and then he makes another mission trip to the Falkland Islands, on the southeast coast of South Africa, and there he dies of starvation. How about Spencer Johnson? He was a tree trimmer, All of the trees that he climbed, all the trees that he was up in, and that cherry picker, and all of this dangerous work. And here, Spencer dies picking apples out of an apple tree. We just don't know, do we? One dear old man up in the town I grew up in, he was a pleasant man, lived a peaceful life, and they found him hanging like a scarecrow on the top of a steel post. He was out fixing fence, and there he died that way. And Avery Rogers, he was one of the first preachers down at the Bentley camp meetings. I remember hearing him a few times in the 70s, and lo and behold, he died making a U-turn going to a meeting when he was hit crossways by a semi. And so the Lord knows. That's all you can say. God knows. Lord, you know all things, verse 17. Fourth point. So first, the certainty of death. Second, the timing. Third, the kind of death. And fourth, the goal of our death. The goal of the death of the believer is what? The glory of God. This signifying what kind of death signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. The glory of God. Don't you know, I'm reminding you of something you already know if you're a Christian, and that is the goal of our life is the glory of God. That's the chief end of man. We want our deeds to so shine before men that they may what? Glorify God. In whatever you do, in word or thought or deed, do all to the glory of God. Over and over this comes out in one way or another in the New Testament, 1 Peter chapter 4, that him who serves do so as by the strength which God supplies, that God in all things may be glorified through Jesus Christ. This repeated theme comes up, and this really, in a way, is the crisis of conversion, like Amberly was bringing out. I live my life for self-glory. Now I want to glorify God in everything I do from here on out. That's Christianity. Living for the glory of God. And the masses of humanity, they die like beasts. Psalm 49, man who dies without understanding and wisdom, like Seth is bringing out, is like the beasts that perish. They just die and are so insignificantly laid aside.